It's represented here on the type table that is published in just about every publication that has to do with type. Now these codes, the 16 codes that you just saw, are made up of one letter from each of these pairs. The letter that represents our preference for extroversion versus introversion, how we get and direct energy. The letter that represents sensing versus intuition, how we take in information. Thinking versus feeling, how we make decisions. And judging versus perceiving, our general approach to life. Now the middle two letters of the type code are the mental functions or the cognitive processes and represent the core of our personality, what many of us call the heart of our type. It's the heart of type that defines who we are and what our natural interests are. And the four letters of type correspond to the columns, the four hearts of type correspond to the columns of the type table. For instance, ST types are practical and matter-of-fact. Their interests and values are driven by a need to get it right. SF types are sympathetic and friendly. Their interests and values are driven by a need to provide service. NF types are enthusiastic and insightful. Their interests and values are driven by a need to empower. NT types are logical and ingenious. Their interests and values are driven by a need to understand. If we can verify the heart of type, we can suggest typical college majors that might be a good fit and typical career fields. Now that you've seen that, that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to look at the complete reverse of that, the letters that don't show up in our type. Now, experienced type practitioners know that type is the natural preferred way of using one's mind and directing energy. It's a lot like folding your arms. If you fold them one way and then fold them again with the other arm on top, the two positions feel very different. One is very natural and the other one requires extra energy. But we can do it the less natural way. The fact the more we do it, the more comfortable it becomes. But it never becomes as comfortable as the natural way, the way that when you fold your arms you just do it automatically without thinking. So it is with the heart of our type. Our natural preferences come easily to us. That's not what we're talking about right now. Today we're talking about the other side of our type, the opposite poles of the middle two letters in the type code. So ST would be the opposite of the NF that you saw first. They're the opposite of our heart of type. And the opposite poles from the heart of our type can either enrich our lives or, of course, sabotage us when we're under stress. The challenge of type development is what Jung referred to as integration, embracing the functions that are the opposite of our heart, consciously accessing them when appropriate so they don't sabotage us or control us. If you're used to interpreting type as a static entity, such as ISTJs are good with facts and detail and enjoy careers in accounting and statistics, you might wonder why we're even concerned with developing the less preferred functions. And there are actually many reasons. Somewhere between maybe the ages of 30 and 75, many people naturally begin to ask questions like, my work isn't really interesting anymore. I wonder if I'm in the right career. Or I'm not challenged. When did my work become so routine? Such questions are often coming from the less preferred functions that are seeking expression during the mature stages of career and life development. Jung's concept that each person has an innate urge to grow. Now, another reason we look at the other side is that not everyone can find a job that's a good fit for their heart of type. In many cases, developed less preferred functions can at least be an entry into a job in a satisfying work environment that might become more appropriate for the person later. Sometimes the ideal job description won't be perfect for the person when they're working out of the other side of type, but at least gets them in an environment that's satisfying to them. Now, less preferred functions are often the cause of stress, but they're just as often the means of coping with stressful situations. And we'll look at all of these reasons. Reaching to the other side of our type isn't about changing who we are. It's about adding to who we are. It's about enriching. It can be kind of fun, actually, to try out our less preferred functions in leisure activities, situations that are less risky, non-threatening. Most employers, unfortunately, don't hire us for our inferior functions. They hire us for what we do naturally and what we do well. In career situations, the less preferred functions are more likely to develop if we're using them in support of our heart. And it also helps to observe and interact with types who naturally use the functions that you're trying to develop. Two popular CPP publications offer suggestions for how to make type development a conscious effort. Myers and Kirby, in Introduction to Type Dynamics and Development, suggest many activities for experiencing and developing the less preferred functions. I'm going to talk about them very briefly here. They're described quite thoroughly in the booklet. For instance, for NJ types who want to develop extroverted sensing. Now, NJ types introvert intuition. So developing the other side of type would be looking to sensing as it's extroverted. Now for NJ types, playing a skills game where you have to pay close attention to the here and now develops extroverted sensing. Myers and Kirby suggest juggling. I can tell you as an NJ type myself, to juggle, when it's not like I juggle every day, but I fool around with it once in a while. When I juggle, I have to pay very close attention to what's happening right now. And that isn't what my NT normally does. For SP types who naturally extrovert sensing but might want to develop the other side, introverted intuition, something like choosing a common object and writing about it without giving any physical description or details will develop introverted intuition. Having them focus on the mood it creates or its larger implications rather than on the here and now that they look at naturally. Now for FJ types who want to develop introverted thinking, taking something that you've written and deleting all extraneous adjectives and adverbs, replacing them with nouns and verbs that convey the same concept. This is introverted thinking. Now TP types who naturally introvert thinking and might want to develop extroverted feeling, asking a couple of people that they'd like to get to know better, to have lunch with them, ask them questions that would help them to get to know them personally. They're exercising extroverted feeling. Now, during lunch, staying away from questions that are task-oriented, anything that's work-related, and paying attention to facial expressions and body language and adjusting interactions with the person accordingly. This is what extroverted feeling is. It's what FJ types do naturally, but the TP types might want to develop. I'm a big fan of Sharon Richman's Introduction to Type and Leadership publication. She has a wonderful description in this booklet of the 8 different ways that we can relate to oranges. It seems silly, but it really helps us and students to get in touch with our less preferred S, N, T, and F in both the introverted and extroverted orientations. And I often use her descriptions to give clients an understanding of which functions need to be developed in order to be successful in work settings that might necessarily be where they'd like to be working. And I'm going to give you just a few examples here of Sharon's orange stories. For instance, when she's describing introverted sensing, she says to hold an orange. And while you're holding the orange, close your eyes and think of the first time you ever encountered an orange in your life. Recall all of the details, the sight, the smell, the sounds, the location, who you were with. This is using sensing internally. Now, to develop extroverted intuition, or at least to recognize it, put the orange in front of you with someone else so that you're talking about it. List all of the novel uses you can imagine for an orange. This is talking about intuition. You're brainstorming. Take 5 oranges. Now, this is extroverted thinking. Take 5 oranges. Organize them based on some objective criteria. See if someone else can identify the criteria you used to organize the oranges. The introverted feeling, the last one I'm going to talk about briefly, I'm going to actually elaborate on a little bit later with a case study. To get in touch with introverted feeling, describe what matters most deeply to you. How does an orange reflect that? How are you influenced in daily life by those values? And that's so you're turning your feeling inward and getting in touch with what's important to you. As an example of the first reason that MBTI practitioners want to be concerned with the other side of type, I wanted to share with you an INTJ university administrator that I worked with recently who was approaching 55. And he described himself as, I feel as though what I do doesn't matter anymore. His teaching career was in agricultural engineering, and he felt very torn about it. Should he go back to teaching? Was university teaching the right career in the first place? And we didn't use any assessments. He had actually verified INTJ as his type years before and just didn't feel comfortable with it anymore. There wasn't any reason to retest him. He knew what his type was, so we were just working from that. And what he was experiencing was Jung's innate urge to grow, the less preferred introverted feeling function seeking expression, accompanied by some restlessness and some confusion and the midlife questioning that people often have about their careers. Person-centered values were becoming much more important to him, and he wanted his work to reflect that. When we looked over the orange examples, such as the ones that I mentioned on the previous slide, he focused right in on describe what matters most deeply to you. How does an orange reflect that? How are you influenced in daily life by those values? He focused right in on introverted feeling. Now for an INTJ, this is going to be his tertiary function. We explored ways that he could integrate this new awareness into his work. Fortunately, he's due for a sabbatical next year, and he's applied to work with an eco-engineering Peace Corps group in Africa. My suspicion is that he'll return from that, hoping that he gets the position, he'll return from that with a renewed energy for his university work. My professor friend was adding tertiary feeling to his NT heart of type. His type was not changing. He was integrating and expanding. And the restlessness that he was feeling when we met will develop into life and career enrichment. Type development is about pulling our third and fourth functions more and more into our consciousness and under our control. What you have here in this graphic are the 4 functions, the middle 2 letters of your type and their opposites. And the horizontal line, the kind of bow that goes across the middle, is dividing conscious awareness from the subconscious. And you can see that the dominant, the number 1, the predominant letter in the middle of your type, that's almost all in our conscious awareness, certainly by the end of the teen years. And then number 2, the auxiliary function, pretty much under our conscious control. And the tertiary function, half and half, very often more down than up. And then you see the 4th function, that inferior function, just a little bit under our conscious control. Now the goal of type development, when we have to, just from that natural innate urge to grow or to adjust for a job or whatever, the goal is to pull all of these 4 functions into our conscious control, never equally, but so that we're using them appropriately. And this begins with awareness, just an awareness of what the functions are. And that's why I love that orange example, because it's so concrete that everyone can relate to it. And it begins with awareness, and then it moves into practicing the functions. and then actually developing facility with them so they're there if we need them. There's a reason for this armchair picture. You're going to see it in just a minute. Younger clients often have to experience the same process as the university professor, but it's much more challenging for them because they're not necessarily developmentally ready to access that other side of type. I remember clearly an ENFP college graduate who had graduated recently, and I worked with her several years ago. I'll call her Julie. She had majored in art history, ENFP majoring in art history, and she wanted to work in the appraisal and auctioning of fine jewelry and antiques. She had even done an internship with Sotheby's in London. She was well prepared to enter her field, but the field wasn't ready for her. There were no jobs in her field. She was not experiencing the innate urge to grow. What she was experiencing was a practical need to develop her less preferred functions to get in the door, so she'd be ready and in the right place at the right time when the job market did open up. When I met her, she was applying to MBA programs. Her businessman father had told her that an MBA would make her employable, and it very well could have. But the central issue when being forced to develop non-preferred functions is to keep them as close to the heart of type as possible. In this case, developing ST but close to her NF passion for antiques and jewelry. She did begin an MBA program, but she also found a mentor, a woman who owned an antique restoration and sales business. Julie jumped right into sensing and thinking, restoring antique furniture to very exacting specifications. At the same time, she looked for opportunities to work the front of the shop, enthusiastically describing and selling the pieces that she had worked on to potential buyers. By the time she was 26 or 27, she was working for a company that managed estate sales and auctions. By then, she knew the business inside out and had both the NF passion and the ST hands-on experience. It wasn't that she was in the right place at the right time. She made her place and time. She had a good role model, and she was developing the other side of her type in support of her NF. We don't want to overlook the importance of leisure activities in developing the other side of our type. As I mentioned before, employers are not always willing to pay us to develop our less preferred functions, especially our number 4 inferior function. And activities outside of work often provide non-threatening situations to try things out. I'll give you a few examples. As a personal example, I haven't found very many people who would pay me, my own INTJ type, for sensing, precision, and accuracy, but I've developed some pretty good extroverted sensing skills playing Jeopardy with my grandkids. I'm getting better and better. One of the participants in our online MBTI certification program is an ENFJ academic advisor at Brigham Young in Hawaii, and she gave me permission to share how she's developing tertiary sensing. She's ENFJ. In addition to academic advising, she finds great pleasure in acting and choreographing and instructing dance. All NF, right with her heart of type. Feeling the urge to grow her sensing and not particularly drawn to the fact-based aspects of academic advising, she's recently found fulfillment in Polynesian bone carving. She shared that bone carving is only as good as the tools used, no matter the creativity involved, and it requires heavy attention to detail and full access on the task full focus on the task at hand. And as her sensing has developed, her attention to detail has carried over to her work. Let's look at an ESTP type. Lake Tahoe, where I live, is a very physical community. About 75% of the employment in the area is related to winter sports and lake activities. Most of the rest of employment happens to be emergency medicine, I'm afraid. I have an ESTP neighbor in his early 40s who loves extreme skiing and he loves snowmobiling, usually out of bounds and always high risk. He works 2 jobs to support his family: snow removal and construction. He enjoys taking his 2 young boys on snowmobile adventures, probably a pretty good example of developing his feeling function while doing his own ST passion. Last year he was involved in a major accident, and the accident took his life in an entirely new direction. Literally overnight, he recognized the importance of his family and his desire to stay alive. The MBTI and I came into the picture when he wanted to explore what he referred to as safer career options. His strong interest inventory results actually provided a clue to his developing feeling and maybe even his intuition. His theme code on the strong was RCA, realistic, conventional, artistic. And culinary arts, which is artistic, popped up along with athletics, nature, mechanics, and construction. He decided to take a cooking class at the local community college, and then another one, and now he's completing a certificate in culinary arts. Instead of working construction this summer, he has a job in the kitchen at a huge mountain resort that's active in the summer with water sports and in the winter with cross-country skiing. He wants to be a chef, and I can vouch for him, he's a very good cook. And then there's Lenny. Lenny's an ISFP social worker who used to play chess with my husband when my husband was alive. I hadn't seen Lenny in years, and he popped up one day on a website where I had gone to download some chess strategies. By golly, he'd become a chess master, an ISFP chess master, and had his own website where he instructed others. Who knew? When we talked about it, he said he was drawn to the strategizing and if-then thinking of the chess game, a clear expression of NT. And the ESFJ retired high school teacher that I know who learned ST computer skills and developed an online format for delivering the district curriculum to students who are homeschooled. Now, what you may have noticed about these case vignettes is that these people haven't been drawn to functions that are the complete opposites of their preferred. We don't see very many ISTJ accountants who suddenly get an urge to become stage actors. And we don't see very many ENFP motivational speakers who have strong desires to become accountants at midlife. What happens when we feel the pull of the other side of our type is that we tend to reach into the hearts that adjoin our own for development. So, ST types will reach into SF and NT. There's some overlap with S in the SF direction, and there's some overlap with NT in the T direction. And NF types will reach into SF and NT, the same overlap in each direction. NF types, for instance, will feel a desire to be practical with their empowering, and they'll begin to look more like SF practical helpers for a while. They'll often seek theoretical explanations, NT, for the work that they're doing. And ST will often begin to question their spirituality, theoretically, NT, or through traditional religious avenues, SF. We're going to pause in a minute for questions, because up to now we've been talking about the healthy expression of the other side of our type through type development. The other side of type is also useful when learning to cope with and manage stress. But before going there, there may be some points that need clarification, comments. And Leah, have any questions or comments come in that you'd like me to address before we move on?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that have come in.
Thank you.
First of all, your friends at UT Martin wanted to say hello again.
they always do.
Yeah, there's 8 of them there that always.
Oh, that's wonderful, and we're going to miss them in Tahoe in 2 weeks.
So Remco has a question. He's wondering, isn't an MBTI Step 2 assessment also a way to explore the opposites of type?
I think so. For people who are not aware of it, the MBTI Step 2 starts with the 4 preference dichotomies and then adds 20 subscales, what are called facets, that kind of give an individual interpretation to it's how we live out a general type as individuals with specific individualized characteristics. And one of the ways we use it is to see where a facet that is attached to one of our preferences may be on the other side, what's called an oops. Just an example, I happen to be a thinking type, but on the Step 2 I'm a compassionate thinking type. Now, compassionate is a facet that's associated with feeling, and if I'm consciously developing the feeling side of my personality, compassionate characteristics are where I'm going to start because they come most easily to me, and from there I can expand to develop more of the empathetic, accommodating, accepting, and tender characteristics. But starting with where I'm most in the F direction to begin with would certainly be certainly make logical T sense to me. So good point.
Okay, excellent. So Jill has a question. She's asking, do you find that after people go through the meaning of life challenge, they revert back to their national preferences or then stick to the opposite side?
Oh, interesting. My introversion wants to reflect on that one for a minute. Keeping in mind that we're not becoming another type. We're adding to what we already are.
That's a great point to clarify.
If you're an NF type and you develop ST, you never become ST. You're an NF that's fuller and richer because you have some ST skills and interests to support it. What I worry about is in this job market where recent college graduates, and let's take NF as an example, NF and NT, liberal arts majors, for instance, who graduate from college, and the job market is really tight. And so they're kind of defaulting into less preferred functions, ST or SF. And I'm not sure that they're consciously aware of what they're doing. The way they express it is, I have to find a job, and this is the only job that's available, so I'll take it. Now, they can easily get trapped into the other side of their type before they're fully aware of their heart of type, of their own heart. And then sometimes the other side of type can kind of take over. And at midlife, they'll go through an experience that becomes very uncomfortable because their natural preferences are constantly pushing to get expressed. They're constantly pushing towards consciousness. You can never hold your natural preferences down. So I have that concern, and I'm not sure how to fix it or address it except by making them consciously aware of what they're doing in the beginning. And that's why I wanted to share Julie with you, the person who went into art appraisal and restoration, because she knew she was an NF. She knew where she wanted to be. She just couldn't start there. She couldn't get there. And so she was very conscious that she was using ST skills and developing ST skills so that she could live her life out in her natural preferences later. Lee, does that sound like addressing, Leah, does that sound like it's addressing it?
Yeah, I think so.
It's such a tough challenge in today's job market with today's students.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. I think that was a really important point to clarify. So I think you did that really well.
Okay.
Carol has a question. I bet other people would be interested in this. So she's curious. You know, you referenced the heart of type in one of your slides. And she would love to be able to reference that. Can she find it any place other than in this presentation?
The heart of type is sometimes referred to as the core of type. It's the type table columns. The type table columns are identified in the MBTI manual, in Introduction to Type, and in Introduction to Type Dynamics and Development with specific characteristics that are related to each one. It's there's several configurations of the type table that each carry their own applications and interpretations. And the columns of the type table represent identity. They are our preference for how we perceive and how we judge, how we take in information and how we evaluate. And it's the core basic Jungian interpretation of type. And although the publications don't call it the heart of type, in fact, I think Jean Kummerow was the one that coined that that phrase. It's the same thing. It's the middle two letters of the type. And it's when we talk type development, it's that middle two letter pairing that we're referencing.
Okay, so the SN, yeah, the inner two.
The ST, SF, NF, and NT, and they're in that order because that's where the overlap is. If you
Right.
take them in that order across the type table, there's overlap between each column.
Perfect. Okay, great, great, great. So Hillary has an interesting question. Can you integrate too soon, or can you force integration?
Well, I think maybe that's kind of what we were talking about with the previous person who asked if you revert back. I don't think there's a yes or no answer. It all begins with childhood. Shall I be Freudian and go back to relationship with mother?
Or developmental.
Yeah, developmental. What's supposed to happen in a perfect world is that the child is allowed to explore all of the cognitive processes, S, N, T, and F. And through that exploration, they will naturally return to the things they do naturally. It's like the hand that you write with. You explore playing with the other, doing things with the other hand, but you return to the hand that you were meant to write with or use predominantly. And if children are reinforced, if they're rewarded when they go into their heart of type and they do something that's really natural and they do it well, and if everybody's behind that, if the parents reward it, the schools reward it, then by the time they get to college, they have a sense of self. And so if they are forced, like the Julie case example, to develop the other side of type in their early 20s in order to get a job, they still have that self-concept to hold on to. On the other hand, the example that we hear so often is the NF child, the NFP child, who's brought up in a military home where everything is STJ, and they don't have the opportunity to really find who they are. So what happens is they develop the other side of type before having any sense of self. And that might be what Hillary means by developing the other side too early. Because then you do become what you do rather than who you were meant to be. And it becomes much more uncomfortable at midlife. You almost have to go through the puberty exploration years when you're 35 or 40 instead of when you're 14 to 20. And so I'm not giving a yes or no answer. I'm just saying I've seen it happen.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. It's either Jean or Jean. It might be Jean, actually, with the French last name, too. How do you answer the person whose MBTI scores, quote-unquote, change later in life? So sometimes Jean hears this with older adults or students, and it may be that they're experiencing type development, but she's heard them say, I'm a different type now. I used to be, this type. So
yeah, well, they're not.
Respond to that, right?
And of course, my type wants to say, no, you're not. But trained counselor that I am, what we have to distinguish between verified true type and reported type. So first of all, once type is verified for a person, taking the MBTI again really isn't necessary. Because if they know their type and they had a good verification experience, they've held on to the information, or you have handouts or resources that can remind them of what their original type meant. Then what you're talking about when you meet them later is how they've developed, how they've integrated. If they happen to take an MBTI a second time or a third time at that point in their lives, their reported type might change. But all that's going on is that it's reflecting what their psyche is, where the psychic energy is at the moment. So it's actually referred to as contextual type. It's what's going on with the type at the moment that the reported type is picking up on. And that gives me the opportunity to say that the value of type is not in the instrument, it's in what the practitioner does with the instrument. The instrument it's not called an indicator by accident. It happens to be the best indicator that's available to us. It's the one that's the most reliable, the most valid, but in the hands of the practitioner, you can take what changes on paper and use it as a point of exploration. Talk to me about what's going on in your life right now. And I remember very well when I was going through a major illness in my family, when my husband was critically ill, and I was still working, and I was trying out the step 2 for the first time and all kinds of things. And I am such a clear INTJ, and I couldn't help but respond to the questions at that time in my life from the F part of my personality, because personal values were just bursting forth. And my type didn't change. What happened was outside influences, the context of my life changed. But as soon as I managed that situation and that feeling function integrated, then I owned my T again. So that's the best example I can give, is that if you take it twice, the second time you take it, first of all, you're going to enter the testing situation with previous knowledge, which kind of messes up your answers anyway. But secondly, it's going to pick up on the context of what's going on in your life. And you know, Leah, when we're using computer-scored versions, excuse me, we have PCIs to look at, preference clarity indexes, and when those indexes are in the slight category, when they're 0 to 5, they're not totally reliable. They're likely to change, and it's because the person isn't certain of the preference. So it happens. It's part of interpreting type and verifying type.
Okay. Judy, do we have time for another question, or did you?
Yes, we do, because
okay.
we structured it this way, so we'd have a little more time for discussion.
Okay, perfect. So,
but, you know, I'm going to mute for just a minute and clear my throat.
Oh, no problem. I'm going to go ahead.
Okay, I'm clear.
Excellent.
Are you doing the same thing?
Yeah. Wendy actually said, thanks, those were fabulous answers and examples. Thanks so much. So it looks like Carol is taking some pretty close notes here.
Okay.
So she was looking for a couple of information to repeat a few pieces of information. So in the beginning, you were talking about a person asks something specific if they're in the right career because they're using their preferred or not preferred type. So what was that specifically that you had said a person asked if they're in the right career?
It was I think that those questions were in reference to the college professor example. Mm-hmm. I feel as though I can't go back and pick up that exact slide, but I feel as though my work doesn't really matter anymore. Mm-hmm. He was an administrator who was saying, I wonder if I should go back to the classroom. This was an NT. But the other question that usually comes up with that is, was university teaching the right career for me in the first place? So it's kind of up to us as practitioners who are working with clients in their 30s, 40s, and 50s to have a really good exploratory session in the beginning to find out what's really going on. Did they choose a career that wasn't a good fit in the beginning? Or have they been in a career field that, at least on paper, looks like it fits their type, and now the less preferred functions are seeking integration? And that's one of the first things we teach in career counseling training, is finding out what the real issue is. Are we looking for a good fit, or are we looking for the opportunity for integration? Okay. The professor was definitely looking for integration.
Right, right. Excellent. That was helpful. And Carol, you know, just keep in mind that we record this, so we'll send a link to the recording in a few days, and you'll be able to go back and listen to specifically what she had said on that slide. So, so Carrie has a
We'll
question.
be expanding that on that too, Leah. I just wanted to say we'll be expanding on that too. Yeah, no, in the fall when we do the adult career counseling strategies,
that's right.
The webinar that was postponed, we'll
right.
really look at that more in depth.
That's right. Okay, very good. So Carol, make sure to register for that. It's in September on the 22nd. You can find that at our website. Let's see. So Carrie was asking, do you have examples you use that can be shared? She says she feels like she's lacking in the examples to use for this information. You've used really relevant examples that would benefit her students to put it in the context of the course and the intent for application.
I guess examples of what?
For example, one example you used personally was your ill husband. So maybe Carrie needs to, can you clarify that a little bit for Judy, and then we can come back to that question.
You know, in all of the advanced type publications, anything that explores the next level of type, Introduction to Type Dynamics and Development, for instance, there are examples of the functions listed in the orientations for the type. So in ESFJ, for instance, there would be examples of introverted sensing and extroverted feeling. For ESFP, it's extroverted sensing and introverted feeling. Those examples apply whether it's a 15-year-old developing the heart of type or a 40-year-old integrating the other side. And so what I like to do is have one resource, so I'm not shuffling through papers. And that's why I love Sharon Richmond's publication about the oranges in the leadership introduction to type, because I can show that to a client and say, let's talk about these. Which of these are absolutely natural to you? Which would you do naturally? And which ones are not so natural to you, that you're still feeling like you'd like to explore further? And so anything like that will give examples. I was, and she may actually be listening, I was working with someone in our certification program last night who was interpreting for someone who didn't know, she didn't know whether the type was ISTP or ISTJ. And how do you know whether that person is extroverting sensing or introverting sensing? It could be the dominant function. It could be not dominant at all, depending on just that JP difference. And excuse me. Excuse me, I had to clear again. And what I talked to her about doing was, since she was talking to this student at a desk, having a little pile of paper clips on the desk. And the example was, if he looked at those paper clips and lined them up, you've got introverted sensing. If that person looked at the pile of paper clips and picked one up and started bending it, it's extroverted sensing. That's that physical sensation of extroverted sensing. It's learning to use little everyday examples like that to point out to a person, what I'm observing is I'm watching you do this. Is that something do you like doing that? Is it fun for you? Do you do that in other areas of your life? Or is it something that isn't really natural for you, but it's intriguing at the moment, which would suggest a more emerging function than something that's a dominant part of your type? You learn when you get into the heart of type thoroughly that there are examples everywhere.
Okay, excellent. So Troy has a question, and
looks like this probably should be the last one before we go on to the next piece.
Okay, we'll do that. So he's a little bit puzzled why someone later in life might have a PCI that's slight. So he's wondering, if you take the assessment later in life, wouldn't your PCI scores be clearer? Wouldn't they be, quote unquote, developed by this time?
Actually, there are two times in life when PCIs are naturally unclear. One is during the teenage years, when the person is exploring their identity for the first time, And the second time, of course there are many others, but these are the two basic. The second time is at midlife, when the less preferred functions are driving that innate urge to grow. They're driving towards consciousness. And so if you happen to be a sensing type, and excuse me, let's do an N. Happen to be an intuitive type, at age 35, 40, 45, all of a sudden you become just totally intrigued with exercise and the outdoor and fine wines and chocolate and all that sensing stuff, and you sit down and take the MBTI, you're going to answer it out of that context. And although your natural preference might be intuition, you're just so excited about discovering all this sensing stuff that you answer a lot of questions in the sensing direction as well. And so the practitioner sees the reported type, and the PCI might be 2 or 3, and it could be in either direction. Same thing with a teenager who's just figuring it all out for the first time.
Okay, great. So we'll hold the rest of the questions and we can move forward.
Okay, and I'm going to hope my my throat holds out. Why do I always lose my voice when I'm talking online?
Because you're talking a lot.
Is that it? Okay, I'll go on.
Okay, you sound good on this end, Judy. So.
Okay, we've been talking about the healthy, normal development access to the other side of type. Now let's talk about stress a little bit. I haven't seen actual data on this, and I know that sensing types that are attending today would really like specific references, but it's widely accepted that most adults become uncomfortable when asked to spend more than 25% of their work time in their less preferred functions. So for instance, an SF type who's asked to spend more than 25% of their time doing NT strategic planning instead of providing practical service to others. Now, even when the 25% is spent developing skills that support the heart of type or what the heart of type prizes, it can still become uncomfortable and create stress. And this 25% percentage is even lower for younger clients and college students who are just becoming aware of their natural types. And that kind of addresses one of the questions that came in earlier, that if you're forced to work out or live out of the other side of your type before you really own your natural preferences, it can take just 5% of 10 or 10% of your type of your time spent outside of the heart of type and in order to feel stress and discomfort. So the first trigger for stress that kind of takes us to the other side of type is spending too much time on the other side. The other stress trigger is often when we're asked to go against what our heart of type stands for. And I'll give you some examples of this because it's a little more complicated. For instance, ST types tend to feel the most stress when they're expected to do something but they aren't told how to do it. Their instructions are unclear. And I often see this with ST participants in our online certification program. Sometimes they run up against my dominant intuition, which thinks that my instructions are very clear on an assignment, and to STs they're not. And they're frustrated by it, and so they come back to me with, please clarify. And if I'm tired and I can't access my sensing, then my intuition just makes it more jumbled, and I can really see the stress setting in. And so I'll often say to them, let me get back to you with a clearer answer tomorrow when my intuition isn't running rampant, and that's very helpful. SF types will sometimes literally become helped out, and it's when too many people need their help at the same time and they begin to feel unappreciated, or they don't have the resources available to help everybody that's asking for their help. I personally experienced this in my own family with an SF type who hosts our family Thanksgiving every year, and she's just a wonderful, loving ESFJ, and she loves preparing and sharing traditional family recipes and using the family china and silver and providing the family home where up to 20 of us gather every year. And she doesn't want us to help at all. It's her SF thing to do this. But almost every year, it's almost like clockwork. It's so predictable. She's completely overwhelmed just about at dinner time because she's completely helped out. She doesn't have, her SF is, it's worn out. And so she tends to flip and start imagining implications from the other side of her type. Now, for NFs, stress can be triggered when they're asked to be inauthentic, to be someone or something that they're not. I notice the most when they're micromanaged, when they have to do things the same way all the time, or when they work for an employer who doesn't support what they believe to be important, or they're asked to do something unethical. We're just talking about triggers, things that throw you out of your type into the other side. NTs will experience this when they don't understand the why behind what they're doing. They're learning something in a classroom, for instance, and they don't understand the theoretical rationale for what's being taught, and they'll often go into an angry mode or a frustrated mode. Now, what happens when these triggers get too intense is that we're thrown into the other side of our type. So instead of naturally accessing skills, characteristics, behaviors in the adjoining hearts, we kind of flip to the opposite, and we do it. I mean, NFs do ST, and SFs do NT, but we tend to do it badly. We don't do it well. And some of you may be familiar with Naomi Quank's work. Naomi talks about being in the grip of the inferior function, the number 4 function. And it's when stress is extreme and we lose the ability to function out of our natural preferences at all. And there's a formula for determining the order of the mental functions, the cognitive processes for each type. And this formula identifies the number 4 or the inferior function for every type, and it's the function it's that one of the middle 2 letters, the function, that will control us if we're not in control of it. And we won't go into it here, but if you don't know your order of preferences, you might want to find it on this table and make a note of it, which will personalize the examples that we give next. This table is in all the MBTI publications. And there's also a formula, if you don't have a publication handy, there's a very easy formula for each type to figure out which is number 1 and which is number 4. I'm pausing just for a moment to make sure that everyone has a chance to find their type if they need to.
Thank you, Judy. I'm writing mine down myself.
Okay. I'll give some examples. Now, when the inferior function, the number 4 function, grips us, to use Naomi Quank's language, as I mentioned, we do it, but we don't do it very well. Now, for instance, intuitive types, Ns, tend to get obsessive. They do sensing, but they'll do it in the extreme. I have to clear my throat again, I'm sorry. So you might find an intuitive type getting super focused, reified on some detail that's unimportant. Now, S's do this in the reverse. Sorry, my mouse is fighting with me here. Here we go. Sensors will do N in the extreme. They'll tend to catastrophize. Now, they're using intuition, but again, they're not using it at its best. Feeling types under super stress will get super, super critical. It's T in the extreme. And, you know, there's no one in the world that's nicer than people who extrovert feeling. But when they're very stressed and very tired, the T will come out, and it comes out in bursts of it. And T's in the extreme will get real emotional. And when the inferior function grips you, it's almost impossible to get back to your normal way of functioning. And we're going to look at a theoretical model for this, and I hope I can give you practical examples. But just keep in mind that since the dominant and the inferior functions, the 1 and the 4, for instance, if N is your dominant and S is your inferior, those are on opposite sides of a dichotomy. They're two poles of the same dichotomy, and it's psychologically impossible to be in both places at the same time. So if you're an N that's been gripped, taken over by S, you can't get back to N. It's like there's a break between them. So if you're an ENFP type and inferior sensing grabs you, you'll just keep obsessing on S. And I actually have a colleague that I've seen this happen with her when we're working together. When she has to get something done, she has to finish a PowerPoint, and she's under stress and she's up against a deadline, and there'll be something wrong with the way the PowerPoints are configured, and she'll just keep going at it and going at it and going at it, and it gets more and more stressful and more and more stressful. And what she's doing is S has grabbed her. She's lost the N perspective, and she just keeps S-ing and S-ing and S-ing. And instead of fixing the problem, it makes it worse. And so what we want to do is find ways to get out of that situation that are helpful, practical, useful, and efficient. Because otherwise, she'd still be working on that PowerPoint presentation 3 years from now, and the presentation's due in the morning. Now, the tertiary function can be very helpful when the other side of our type grips us and overwhelms us. And Naomi Quenk has begun to suggest some of this in her publications on the inferior function. And I've actually done a lot of work with it in training counselors and find it to really work. Now, the more you use your tertiary function, that's your number 3, which is a lot easier to access than your inferior function, the more integrated it will feel. The more you use it, the more easily you'll be able to access it when you need it, for instance, under times of stress. In fact, it's often the tertiary function, it's kind of like a magic button that releases the grip of extremely stressful situations. And I'll give you just a few examples. ENFJ types, for instance, their tertiary is sensing. They will often relax when they can shift to something physical. An ENFJ type under stress, taking a walk, eating a good meal. I have an ENFJ colleague who says that doing something very down to earth and practical that has a tangible outcome just helps her get out of stress immediately. The example she uses is doing the dishes. And it's sensing and they're done. And when she goes there and does that, it releases the stress that her ENFJ type is feeling and gets her back into the heart of type and seeing the bigger picture of empowering others and what's more important. ISFP types, for instance, their tertiary is intuition. And they'll often feel their stress let go when they can discuss the bigger picture or alternative possibilities with someone else. My stepson's an ISFP, and he coaches Little League, and his wife knows that when he loses several games in a row, she needs to get him talking about the bigger picture. She needs to get him talking about the lives that he has touched with his coaching over the years, to get away from the losses that have just happened. ISFJs, their tertiary is thinking. They'll often feel stressed when there's just too many people who need them, and they don't have the resources to help them out. I have an ISFJ social worker colleague and friend who shared that what works for her is to schedule a block of time by herself to just figure out a logical solution to the problem. She gets herself into an internal problem-solving mode, which gets her into thinking, and that will take her out of the stress of intuition, which is how she expresses stress, catastrophizing, and back into her SF heart of type. ENTP, another good example. ENTPs, their tertiary is feeling. And what's really interesting about ENFPs, who are so intellectually curious and aren't necessarily, they don't show their feelings too often. Now, their tertiary is feeling, and when they're super stressed, they really tend to welcome the support of friends, the support of family members, reminders that they're cared about. See, it's that tertiary feeling that that gets them back to the NT mode that really works for them. And another thing that seems to work for ENTP types is taking the time to focus on something creative, listening to music that they really enjoy, or enjoying the arts, or going to a play, or something like that. It's again accessing the feeling part of their personality. But I think what's fascinating about this approach, what's so interesting about it, is that when we're looking at the other side of type, it's that one less preferred function that's sabotaging us. Under extreme stress, it's the inferior that grabs us, but it's the other function on the other side of type, the tertiary function, that actually grips us. That actually enriches us. So we have one part of the other side of type causing havoc, and the other part of the other side of type saying, hey, I'll help you out and bring you back to the heart. Now, I've put a slide together here to try and demonstrate these examples visually, because I know there are a lot of people visual. Now, what you've got under, not very good artwork here, what you have to imagine or see is that we've got two sides of one pole here. We've got the number 1 function on one side, and we've got the number 4 function on the other. That's the dominant and the inferior. The dominant is the master of our ship, the captain of our ship. It's in the middle of our heart of type. It's who we are. It represents our greatest strengths and positive personal characteristics. Now, what happens under stress is that we lose that. We lose everything that characterizes our number 1. It doesn't happen right away. Usually what happens is that we go into our dominant and it exaggerates first. So if you're dominant N, under a lot of stress, the first thing that will very often happen is that the N will get bigger. Possibilities will start to overwhelm. If stress continues, you'll actually flip to the number 4. And there'll be a detail that grabs you, something physical, or some fact, or some, the staples aren't straight in your handouts. There's something that sticks you in your number 4. And once you make that jump over to the number 4, once it grabs you or grips you, you can't access that number 1. There's that space in between is meant to demonstrate that if number 4 grabs you, it's so powerful. When you're under stress, you've lost the cognitive control to access the number 1 again. It's too big a jump. It's too big a stretch. Although you can fall over that abyss, that canyon, you can be shot out of a cannon over to that number 4 when stress hits you. You can't cognitively work your way back. So the way back to what's most natural and what's best about your type is to take smaller steps. And this is why, if you're gripped by the number 4, having access to the tertiary function is the key. And if you're under such stress that you can't access your tertiary, very often people who know you well and love you and care about you can. And it doesn't take a theoretical model that's been around for 100 years for them to see it. My tertiary is feeling. My husband knew perfectly well that when I was under super stress, if he gave me a hug, it unlocked it. He didn't need Carl Jung, and he didn't need a lot of visuals and formulas to figure that out. He just knew that if he just touched me gently, it would unlock that uncharacteristic sensing thing that my INTJ goes into. But what's interesting is that he was an ENFP, and when he was gripped, he was also gripped by sensing. He would fall into his inferior sensing and start focusing on some detail that was absolutely stupid. Now, if I went after him with feeling, he'd fight me. He resisted, because his ENFP type, when he was gripped by sensing, didn't respond to the same feeling that my type did. What he needed was logic. And whenever he started, it didn't happen very often. ENFPs are wonderful with stress. They somehow manage it, I think, in beautiful ways. But when he did focus on some sensing piece that was derailing him, I would just say, hey, wait a minute, let's approach this logically. And he would literally hear the word logic and his eyes would unglaze, and he'd just jump right into the process of figuring out a logical solution to the problem, whatever it was. Now, what's interesting about this is once you get into the tertiary function, whether you recognize the pathway to get there yourself or whether someone else helps you there, once you get there, the access to the number 2 is much easier. It's much closer. It's your auxiliary. And once you get to the number 2, you're back into the pairing of your heart of type, and the access to the number 1 just happens. Because the number 1 and the number 2 work together. Very hard to separate. It's your heart of type. And from the number 3 to the number 2 is kind of the last pull. But once you're in the number 2, you're home free. I'm hoping that that diagram works a little bit, but I don't want to confuse anybody. But I'm hoping that that you can see from what we've been talking about is that type is much more than the 4 letters that we get when we take the assessment. Any person's type also includes the mental functions that are not in our type code, that are on the other side. And those letters, in this case ST supporting ENFJ, that other side can enrich us, as we talked about during the first part of our discussion, and sometimes they can sabotage us. And a deeper understanding of all of this, a deeper understanding of type, includes owning, developing, and trusting the heart of our type first, because that's what defines and gives purpose to who we are. So having those middle 2 letters and knowing what they are and owning that that's who we are with all of the challenges and pitfalls that go with them. And then calling upon our less preferred functions to support the heart of who we are, and managing our less preferred functions so that they're under our conscious control. This is the deeper understanding that takes us beyond just a static, I'm an ISTJ, therefore I like numbers. Now, learning more about type, going to a deeper level, is something that's covered in certification programs. In our online program, we work on this really hard because so many students are involved in this type development piece. There are many ways to get certified on the MBTI. CPP offers a wonderful program. CPP is the publisher, and they're hosting this webinar. The American Management Association hosts a program. These are their websites. CAPT, the Center for Applications of Type, has a certification program. And my company is GS Consultants. We do certification online. Our program is specifically for educators and career counselors. It's not open to anyone else. And we also do strong certification, and we've got a strong certification that's the strong interest inventory. We have a certification for that instrument coming up in June. It's hard to narrow down the references on everything. This is a very big topic we've been covering today, and a lot has been written about this topic. Introduction to Type Dynamics and Development, Introduction to Type and Leadership, Introduction to Type in the 8 Jungian Functions. These are the key publications. And then if you're interested in the stress, the whole stress topic, Naomi Quank's In the Grip. Jean Kumaro has written a wonderful publication that's published by CAPT called Type Dynamics, Another Level of Type. And Naomi Quink has also written a book that expands on her In the Grip publication called Was That Really Me? That's a full book that you can get from any publisher of books. And for anything you're purchasing for CPP, with the exception of assessments and Skills 1 and renewal fees and things, as usual, CPP is giving us a 10% discount. And make note of that code, budget 511, budget 511. This is a 10% discount offer that expires on May 27th. Some of you may actually want to take the MBTI, or even if you'd like to take the Strong, and CPP has a website for that. It's the Test Drive website, cpp.com/test drive, where you can take the assessments. And I have a blog, GS Consultants blog, where we talk a lot about interpretation challenges. Most of you know Jim and Jack. They're on the program today. Jim Larkin and Jack Powers are the education account representatives who can talk to us about products and how to buy things, which products to buy over another, which assessment report to buy over another. They love to talk about type, and these are their numbers and their emails to get in touch. Now, Leah, we're at the end, and we still have some time if questions have come in about this huge topic that we just covered, lickety-split.
Well, we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So Bruce had a question, and he may just be interested in a couple other ideas. He says he's a 61-year-old male who's a solid, or I'm assuming clear, ISTJ. He served as a senior pastor for more than 28 years, and he's looking for ways to reinvigorate his ministry and life vocation. So he's begun teaching seminary students in a formal setting, and he's wondering if you have any ideas on ways to, quote-unquote, investigate his inferior side. And
now, what I hear is that Bruce is asking me for career coaching. and that's a little bit more than we have time for here. But the question I would put out would be, think of NF. Think of exploring ideas that will empower people in different ways, using the knowledge and experience that you've gained through the ministry to empower in different ways. It may be different ways to explore spirituality. I know, for instance, I used to teach a Sunday school class, and I remember the days when we were first bringing music and poetry and rock music and things like that into the church. And the church was a very, the Sunday school format was a very SF format. And it was, what happened was when a pastor came in that had an NF orientation, those gifts were shared. And so we expanded beyond the SF approach and incorporated that. I'd like to see Bruce work with a type professional to explore various ways, because it may be studying and reading about spirituality from different angles, but the main thing is to hold on to the SF that's important, that is who you really are, and add some N to it, and maybe even some T. It may be time for a PhD in theology. Who knows? How's that for career counseling in 30 seconds?
Bruce, you'll have to let us know.
I'm always afraid to say something like that, because it really is a more extensive conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Janine wanted to provide feedback. She loves the diagram. It really works for her.
Oh, thank you, Janine. Thank you.
And apparently Bruce thought that was great, so thank you very much.
Good. I'll have to work on that artwork, though.
So let's see. A few questions coming in. So Mary had a question. So she says she's an MFT student, Master of Fine Arts, or
MFT, Marriage and
Family Therapist,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Student, and she'll often see clients under stressful situations. So she's asking, what can she, quote unquote, look for in MBTI results and in conversations to determine what function is presenting unusually?
Yeah, I'm really glad that that came up. Because that's my background is in clinical work as well. We're in a time, at least in California, where the number of sessions has been restricted. The number of sessions that are paid for by third-party payments, insurance support, things like that, have been restricted. And when I first came into this field, we could see clients and patients from 20 to 30 sessions, and then it got cut back to 10. And now it's being cut back to 3. So if you're going to get insurance coverage, you've got the practitioner has to be able to get to the heart of the matter in a hurry. First of all, as an MFT practitioner, you're probably familiar with what stress looks like and how it manifests itself in different ways. If you have a person's type, even if they're not in a position to verify it, if you have a fairly clear reported type, at least for the heart of type, it's almost magical what happens. You don't have to do any theoretical interpretation or explanation of Jung or anything. You just bring out the tertiary. It's if I'm, for instance, if I'm working with an ENFP under stress, what it looks like, what I see in the therapeutic relationship is that they're completely overwhelmed, and they're up against deadlines, and they get angry, and they start focusing on pieces of information that aren't important, and they're just the end is just to overwhelm them. And I don't have to interpret type to them. I see that overwhelming thing that happens with intuition when it gets under stress, and they slip to sensing and start talking to you about stuff that isn't important in the therapy session. And if you support them with F, they'll fight it. But if you give them logic, if it's, I'm hearing that you've got a you approach it cognitively. This is what I see this problem to be, and let's talk about finding a solution for it. So what you're doing is you're moving right into T, which is their tertiary, and when that happens, I've seen it happen so often, it literally releases the stress behavior. It releases it immediately. And I'm not, I'm not a PhD psychologist. I don't pretend to be. I just know that it's almost a trick that when you can present the tertiary, it's just bingo. The reason it's so important now is that we don't have time in 3 to 5 sessions to go back to people's childhoods and find out what happened when they were 3 years old. We've got to deal with the presenting issue right now. And if the presenting issue is stress, then this is one piece that works. I have a therapist that I now make referrals to who's very well trained in this. What she says is that in the first session with someone, she frames things in all 4 functions to make sure that she hits the tertiary when she doesn't even know somebody. So she'll describe the big picture that she's seeing in the problem. She'll describe, that's the end. She'll give a sensing resource. She'll support them, of course, with feeling and caring, and then she'll suggest a logical solution. What she's doing when she presents those 4 pieces is she's looking for which one tends to relax the person the most quickly in the moment. Now, I've just taught a whole this is in a minute and a half. I gave you a whole practicum, a whole clinical practicum, but it's a tool that's worth trying once you learn how to use it. I got all excited. Sorry.
That was definitely coming out in your voice.
Yeah, it's just so powerful.
Yeah. So Catherine has a question. She says that she works with an ESFJ college department chair who's under stress. Can you suggest what she might do to help her through her tertiary and back onto solid ground?
Well, the bigger picture. You know, ESFJs, when they get under stress, can get very T, very rigid. And it's somehow helping them to access the bigger picture, and it's usually in terms of what they contribute to the overall organization. You know, I might kind of try to get that person to sit down for a personal conversation. Let's have lunch together. Let's have lunch together, and just almost diagram verbally what their role is, the ESFJ director's role is in the overall institution of the college, and get them back in touch with that, because that's what they've lost. And it's what I would try first. And I mean, the other thing you can do with an ESFJ is it may be that they feel like they have to help everybody all the time right now, and that gets tiring after a while, and they begin to catastrophize. And get really angry and resentful, and so sometimes just taking something off their plate. This is what you contribute to the overall organization. I see that's not happening right now because you just got too much on your plate. Let's talk about how we can take a couple things off your plate. It may be just helping them to delegate. But you've got reporting hierarchies and things here too. You can't very well be the therapist for your boss.
Very true. So,
now, Leah.
So Troy has another question around that PCI. I think you've still got some curiosity around that. So he's wondering Is it possible for a person to never develop a strong or clear PCI?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, though, I want to emphasize that PCIs are not the answer. PCIs are just how the person's answering at the time they answer the questions on the inventory, on the indicator. Very frequently, people will have a slight PCI and a very clear preference. I mean, they'll come out sensing, like a sensing 1, and be very clear that they're intuitive. And that's where the role of the practitioner is to figure that out. Or well, I've used my case as an example. I'm an INTJ I've had 190 academic units of F. I have been F'd and F'd and F'd. And so when I answer the questions, I split my vote. But you can tell listening to me I'm a clear T. And I know I'm a clear T. But answering the questions, I split my vote. Now, if someone were picking up my reported type, they'd see that slight PCI. You can't come to the conclusion that my T isn't developed. It's just that when I'm answering the questions, my natural type and the context are both playing a role in how I answer the questions. So don't be too literal about those PCIs. Use your own strengths to see what's really going on behind them. And the answer to the question is, of course, people can sometimes have low PCI or slight PCIs all the time. What I'm more concerned about is people who never develop a clear heart of type. That's tough. That's uncomfortable.
Okay, very good. So Kathy had a question. This one's kind of interesting. So she's wondering if you feel that being forced, if a person is forced to work in their fourth function in a job for a number of years, could that trigger a bipolar episode? And for example, an INTJ forced to manage 30 people in a 24/7-hour company, computer function company, keeping the IT part of the company up and running.
Ouch! My INTJ is shaking. I don't know. Yeah. Bipolar is a clinical diagnosis, and I just don't know. I think that if you work outside of your natural preferences, it can trigger any number of behaviors that could be clinical. I just can't address that one specifically.
Yep. Let's see. So, here's another question. This one's from Sue. What would be your answer to someone who says, so should I try to achieve a balance in the use of these functions?
I kind of like Jung's way of approaching it, which is it's the natural urge to grow. It's the innate urge to grow. I think if you're saying, should I try, unless your job requires it, or you feel the urge coming from inside yourself, I don't think I would just say, gee, I'm 40 years old, it's time to develop my tertiary. I don't think that's the way it works. I think you're required to by life, or you feel it internally. It's an interesting discussion to have with someone, but I just don't think it's an academic thing where, okay, I'm 35 years old, I'm at midlife, I'm 40, whatever, it's time to hit the other side. I don't think it works like that. But that's an opinion. I'm stating an opinion.
Okay.
That discussion doesn't come up the way that I've worked with people. We're probably running close to the end, Leah. I just want to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, we've just got a couple minutes left. This might be a quick question. So Wendy is wondering, she's saying this is very exciting information for therapy in general, dealing with stress via the tertiary.
It is. It is.
Does Naomi's book, in the GRIP book, does it give some specific examples of how to deal with stress?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And so does her full book. The In the GRIP is the booklet series, but Was That Really Me is even better. And I don't think CPP is distributing that anymore. It used to be a Davies Black publication.
Yeah, I think that's available through CAPT, right?
Through CAPT, through CAPT. I know it's also on Amazon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Everyone, it looks like we've come to the end of the webinar, and so I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to attend. I know it's a really busy time during the school year. So
thank you. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, and Judy, I'd like to thank you personally for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for letting me do it, for having me do it.
It's our pleasure. So everyone, today's webinar is part of an ongoing series featuring Judy as our expert. Our next webinar will take place after the summer break on September 22nd, and it will cover the topic Strong and MBTI Career Counseling Strategies for Adult Clients. And this is an advanced topic that this was originally scheduled for April, and we had more than 700 people registered for it. So we've moved it into the fall, and I hope you'll all be able to attend. Just a quick note that in the fall, we're moving our webinars to Thursdays rather than Tuesdays. Just keep that in mind. To register, you can visit our website at www.cpp.com/askanexpert. So thank you all for attending today. Have a great day and a wonderful summer, and we look forward to talking with you all next fall. Take care.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Leah, I'm sorry.
Take care.